It's been a while since I've done an update on the channel, and there's just been so much going on on the channel and off the channel that I want to almost from my own organization kind of coalesce some of it here and talk about my plans and upcoming videos and things of that nature. People ask in comments and in email if I can give these updates, and I guess they're generally appreciated. So here goes a somewhat longer one, perhaps than usual. The first thing I want to mention is that I was really honored to have been a guest co host on Albert Hernandez's One Player podcast. And that episode has just dropped, and it was a really wide ranging conversation about solo RPG, solo board gaming to some extent as well. And though the episode is referenced after the Game Master's Guide, it's about an hour and 12 minutes, and we spend the majority of the time talking about all sorts of other things. We talk about Iron Sworn and D100 Dungeon and light rule sets and Rory's story cubes and all sorts of things that are adjacent to and involved with solo RPG. So I'll put a link to that episode down in this description. And if you're interested, I urge you to check it out. It was, as I said to him at the outset of the podcast, his podcast was one of the first things that I listened to when I was kind of getting into what I consider to be like the social media of the board game culture, meaning at that point, just being on Board Game Geek, which is really actually the only other social media I'm on aside from YouTube, and discovering the fact that there was a whole conversation about solo board gaming and gaming in general, which I had no idea about. And I listened to his podcast early on in that. And so I was really excited when he asked me to be on the show. And it was a fun conversation. And as I said, touched upon lots of things, including interactive fiction and RPG zines and James Bond and a lot of fun stuff. So that was the first thing that I wanted to mention in this update and point you toward that in case you were interested. The second thing, or the next, I'm going to talk about some things that are going to come up on the channel. I think probably the first video to be posted after this one is going to be about a solo RPG called Shades of Ink. This was something that was sent to me. I was I had no idea what this was. It came to me. I didn't even ask for it. It showed up, and it was a case where I opened it up and was a little bit skeptical and not that interested in it, honestly, but I gave it a run through and then looked at the potential for the game and was quickly hooked. So I do an entire playthrough actually of a game of that in a video that's upcoming, and it's really something I think different in the solo RPG space. So that's probably going to be the next video posted after this one. And I'm also working on a video that is about board games, and it is about getting kids into gaming and some 3 or maybe 4 board games and maybe a card game that I think are really useful in demonstrating different types of board game mechanics to kids, and which can be played by you as the parent alongside the kids without you feeling like you're wasting your time. And so I'm doing a video on that because I every now and then I'll do a video on something adjacent to a games for kids, because as a parent, I feel, of course, like I want to spread the hobby to the next generation. And it can be challenging, obviously, how to do that when there's so many different entertainment options available to kids. And in my opinion, it's not really a question of either or. I think, my kids do play games on an iPad and on the computer a bit, but I think there is a way of bringing along kids into the analog aspect of gaming. And so this video is kind of a compilation of a few games that I have that I think are really good gateway games for kids and how to get them into gaming. So that's coming up. And another board game that is coming up is a zombie game, a newish zombie game. It's a solo design called The Night. And it is going to be, there's some elements in that game design as I understand it. I haven't seen the full rules yet, but there are some RPG-ish elements in that game design as optional rules. And so I look forward to digging into that and presenting that sometime in the future on the channel. Back to RPG supporting materials, I'm going to do a video on Dungeon of Cards. I think that's what it's called. I'll put the correct name up here, which is also like an RPG-ish framework for gameplay, and I think, as I understand it, is a little bit on the intersection of board games and RPGs that is kind of so interesting to me, and which was something I explored many, many years ago as I first started putting solo RPG material on the channel when I did the James Bond Assault game video that combined the James Bond role-playing game and the James Bond board game. So that's coming up. I did recently a video on Pocket Fantasy, and when that video was posted, the designer of that game watched the video and offered to send me a set of his new rules on a Pocket Space RPG that he's designed. And I now have that from him, and I'm looking through it, and I want to try to do something on that. One of the challenges I had with the Pocket Fantasy, at least in terms of presenting it to video, and to some extent in terms of my own gameplay, is that the font was really small. It's, in a good way, it's presented on just a few pages, but it was hard to kind of see in the video. I think what I'm going to try to do for this one is to run through it digitally so that I can zoom in on the material and just give you a sense of what is in Pocket Space in terms of the content, and I think you'll be able to see it slightly better there in doing it that way. So at some point down the road, I'm going to do that. I haven't really looked at what he sent yet, but it looks really great. And I feel, and I've said in other videos, there's kind of a dearth of material for light-ish space stuff that you might want to do solo. And I think that this is going to be a great offering into that area. I bought a while ago Dungeon Plumbers, which is a very lengthy supplement to Old School Essentials, and it takes Old School Essentials into diesel punk and the sort of, as they describe, subgenre of steampunk, the child of cyberpunk and Victorian science fiction literature. It's focused on speculative time periods that advance technology based on the early 1900s through the 1950s instead of the steam-powered Victorian era. What if instead of that we took a different turn in the world? And it is the reason that I want to present it on the channel is, well, first of all, I love Old School Essentials for lots of reasons. I've done a video on Old School Essentials, and you can see the link to that video here. But Dungeon Plumbers also comes with its own solo rules, and I want to discuss those solo rules and in talking about also what it offers in and of itself. And that, as I've said on the channel, it is becoming more and more common these days for rules for non-solo RPGs to include some type of solo support. And there's a lot of different games that do that, including another game I have here, Sacrifice, and it comes with its own booklet for GM-less rules and tools. And we've seen this in games like Fallen as well, was something I already presented on the channel. And I'm interested in this development for obvious reasons. And so I want to take a look at Dungeon Plumbers, the content that it has, as well as the way that it goes about offering the solo support, because I think the ways in which designers are choosing to offer solo support, or as it's called here, GM-less rules, says a lot about how the community is viewing solo play at this point. So I will be looking at that coming up, and at this point we're delving, pretty far into the future. But I've also got, I think I may have I don't know if I mentioned this already before. I bought this game Errant. It is described as rules light, procedure heavy. And this intrigued me because well, as they say, procedures are not rules, but neither are they vague general guidance. They provide a framework to structure the game and can be adjusted, deviated from, ignored, hacked, mangled, stolen, or seasoned to taste. And I felt that, as I've talked about in many videos and my solo game master's guide, that oftentimes having some type of procedure, whether it is like what you do in a turn or just a set of a flow that you pre-establish, can really help with solo gameplay, much as it would be almost abhorrent to have that if you were playing a traditional RPG sitting around a table with a GM. You wouldn't want them going through a series of steps necessarily, but for the soloist, it can be really helpful. So to look at a game that has that baked into it, this is not a solo game, though. To look at a game that has this baked into it, I think is going to be really interesting. I was struggling, I'll admit, with a way into creating a story because there's not a lot of environmental background here in this rule set. Now, there may be, this is all I bought, there may be other things that have more context than this does, but I don't have them. But then I realized that my own book, Wanderings, will pair really nicely with this. So I'm going to do a demonstration of some of the procedural rules that come with Errant, using to create the environment that I need to get started. I'm going to turn to my own book, Wanderings, and I think that is going to get me jump started here because I have had a little bit of difficulty. I may have already mentioned this rule set in an update a while ago, but I never actually did anything with it on camera because I've had some trouble. I've started a bunch of times, but had some trouble with it. And speaking of Wanderings, I have been asked on the channel if I'm doing more writing. So I definitely have more book ideas, and it's a matter of time and sort of where I want to put my energy. The Wanderings was a resource for hex crawls, for overland backstory, NPC character backstory. In A Place Underground, I did a literary dungeon table for taking excerpts from literature that related to dungeons and the underground, much as Wanderings was overground literary. And so another place to go, and something I've been thinking about, is just don't really know. At the same time, I have been approached by a bunch of different designers to comment on or contribute to their rule sets, and these are things that are very intriguing. I'm kind of weighing the possibilities for all of that, and again, it's hard to know what direction to go in. So that's just a little bit of an aside in terms of my future writing, because I have been asked about that. And then finally, I have often asked sort of what I do, if anything, off camera, and I struggle to find the time to do all of this, but I think I mentioned this the last time I did a For Against Darkness video. I've been slowly working on the concept of a For Against Darkness story where we start out in a city, basically as a way of using all of my For Against Darkness material, or most of it. So where we start out in a city and then we travel along the coast somewhere and getting into the kind of mountains and hills to get to, we're traveling through some woodlands and meadows to get to the Queen's Garden, the Queen's Palace, to do something. So I'm working on creating this. And of course, Fidget the Gnome is going to be part of that party. I've got a cleric, a psionic, and a druid with Fidget the Gnome. And my druid has a great familiar owl. So I'm putting this together off camera. I've mapped out where I'm going to get the content from. I have my party together, and I haven't actually started playing the game yet or putting them into the places yet. But that's sort of mostly what I'm doing off camera. The other thing I'm doing off camera to bring this video full circle is in the One Player Guild podcast, Albert and I started off talking about Princess Ryan's Star Marines. This is a game, it was Avalon Hill's kind of last big game published under the Avalon Hill name. And I've done a video on it, and you could see that video up here. I have recently watched that video to try to remember how to play this game. And so I've got the game out and I've been playing it. It's a kind of raucous pulp science fiction game where you are trying to rescue a princess who has been stolen, and you're traveling through all sorts of crazy environments to do so. There is some great art in it. There's some terrible art in it. There is a bit of math to do, and it's got a massive footprint. All that said, it's got a great set of boards. All that said, it's a rollicking good time, and it's sort of messy and fun. And Albert and I were talking about it because he has a copy as well and was going to possibly be playing it. So I've gotten that back out to refresh my memory about it. But it's a really great game. So that's what I'm doing off camera, and that is the update for Geek Gamers in coming up. There are a few things I'm actually doing and planning that I haven't mentioned here yet for various reasons. So it's not going to be only this, but this should give you a sense. And then finally, I want to say for those who are still listening that as you know, if you watch the channel, I am not on other social media, despite a lot of people asking me to do Facebook and Discord and such. I can't manage that with everything else I'm doing in the world. So I really do appreciate when viewers of the channel sort of act as ambassadors for the channel by sharing my content in relevant places and other social media, so that there's a way of other people getting to know about the work that I do on the channel if it is of interest to them. So for all of you who do that, I really do thank you so much in helping spread the word about what's going on at the channel.